A listener of mine asked me the following question. John, can OCD be treated without medication? Here is my answer. Medications, specifically SSRIs, are enormously useful as an adjunct in the treatment of OCD. But OCD is about emotional conflict. The compulsions are about doing, albeit in a distorted way, what one would like to do but will not permit oneself to do. The compulsions, it will be noticed, involve muted or otherwise warped expressions of sexual or violent urges, hence their repetitive and, in their muted way, violent nature. The obsessions, the obsessive fears and doubts specifically, are displaced desires. The obsessive-compulsive's fear that so-and-so will die or that such and such a catastrophe will happen is a displaced desire that such and such will happen or that so-and-so will die. To the extent that one can get over OCD, one does so by reintegrating oneself with one's estranged and repressed desires. The obsessive-compulsive person's symptoms are ego-dystonic, as opposed to ego-syntonic, meaning that the obsessive-compulsive does not identify with them. In other words, he sees them as in him, but not as of him. And the way for the obsessive-compulsive to stop having OCD is for him to make his symptoms, as it were, ego-syntonic. In other words, he must make them of him as opposed to just in him. One must distinguish OCD per se from the cognitive architecture, the often hyperfunctional cognitive architecture, that gives rise to OCD. OCD does not itself enhance performance, but it is the pathologicization of structural properties on the part of a person's psyche that are conducive to extreme ability and to extremely high levels of performance. This being why Beethoven, Einstein, Johnson, the person biographied by Boswell, were all sufferers of OCD. It was not their OCD per se that made them great thinkers. It was rather their cognitive architectures that did so, and those cognitive architectures being what they were, being so capable of clinging to ideas and focusing on them, those cognitive architectures were pathologicized. In other words, when they became pathological, they did so by coming down with OCD. It is incumbent on the obsessive-compulsive not to eliminate or amputate his obsessive-compulsive energies, but to channel them in a productive direction. OCD people tend, to my knowledge, to be good at, among other things, law, philosophy, mathematics, engineering, music, and, with some qualifications, psychoanalysis. They are not as good at politics or purely social things, though even that is subject to heavy qualifications. Given the heavy-duty anxiety and depression that are often, if not typically, associated with OCD, SSRIs are de rigueur at certain junctures in the treatment of obsessive-compulsive disorder. But it must be remembered that the therapeutic significance of SSRIs, their very considerable therapeutic significance, is subordinate to the psychological remodeling earlier described, that is, to the reintegration of the subject and the desires from which he is now alienated, and which, because he is alienated from them, make their way back into his consciousness through the subterfuges of compulsive actions and obsessive doubts and fears. Thus, the SSRIs, the selective serotonin re-uptake inhibitors, lift the depression and to some extent modulate the anxiety that inhibit the process of reconciling the subject to his own values and desires, and they thereby disinhibit the process of restoring the integrity of his psychological architecture.